The divorce papers were still warm when Marcus threw them at her feet. "You're defective," he spat, his words colder than the February snow pelting the windows. "What good is a wife who can't give me children?" Lena Moore stood in the doorway of the only home she'd known for 6 years, wearing nothing but a cocktail dress and her wedding ring. He slammed the door. The lock clicked, and just like that, she was erased. On a night when the temperature would drop to 15 degrees, Lena found herself at a bus station with nowhere to go, convinced her value as a woman had just been measured and found worthless. If you want to see how a woman rebuilt her entire life from a frozen bus bench, stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The bus station at midnight was a cathedral of the forgotten. Lena sat on a metal bench that burned cold through the thin silk of her dress, her arms wrapped around herself in a posture that looked like prayer but felt like surrender. Around her, the fluorescent lights hummed their indifferent hymn while a handful of other lost souls waited for buses that might never come. A man in a security uniform eyed her from across the terminal, his expression somewhere between concern and suspicion. She couldn't blame him. She looked like someone who'd fled a crime scene, her makeup streaked down her face, one heel broken, her hair coming loose from the elegant updo she'd spent an hour perfecting that morning for what was supposed to be their anniversary dinner. The anniversary dinner that had ended with Marcus telling her he wanted a divorce. Not because he'd fallen out of love, he'd explained with the clinical detachment of a man discussing a failed business venture. Not because they'd grown apart or wanted different things, but because after 3 years of trying, 2 miscarriages, and countless doctor's appointments, her body had been declared the problem. The tests had come back final and unambiguous. Lena would never carry a child to term. "I want a family," Marcus had said, refilling his wine glass as if they were discussing vacation plans. "I want children, biological children. I'm 38 years old, Lena. I don't have time to waste." The word waste had hung in the air between them like a verdict. She'd tried to speak, to argue, to remind him of the vows they'd made, the life they'd built, the love she'd thought was real. But Marcus had already moved on in his mind. He had the papers ready, had probably had them ready for weeks, just waiting for the right moment to present them. The lawyer's signature was already in place. All he needed was hers. "You can stay until you find a place," he'd offered, as if he were being generous. "But I think it's better if you leave tonight. Clean break." So she'd left, walked out in the dress she'd bought to celebrate 6 years of marriage, grabbed her purse, and nothing else. Everything in that house, the furniture they'd picked out together, the photos on the walls, the coffee maker that knew exactly how she liked her morning brew, all of it belonged to the life she was no longer qualified to inhabit. The cold seeped into her bones as she sat there, watching the minutes tick by on the terminal clock. She had $200 in her checking account. Her credit cards were joint accounts that Marcus would surely cancel by morning. She had no family. Her parents had died in a car accident when she was 22, and she was an only child. Her friends were Marcus's friends, couples from his law firm, women who'd probably already heard about the divorce and were even now crafting their sympathetic but distant text messages. A bus pulled in, its brakes hissing like a sigh. A few people shuffled aboard, but Lena didn't move. Where would she go? To a hotel she couldn't afford? To sleep in a bus station until security finally forced her out into the freezing night? "Miss, you okay?" Lena looked up to find a woman in her 60s wearing a cleaning uniform and an expression of genuine concern. The woman's name tag read Doris. "I'm fine," Lena lied, the automatic response of someone who'd spent years pretending everything was perfect. Doris studied her for a long moment. "Honey, you're wearing a party dress and no coat in the middle of February. That's not fine." She reached into her bag and pulled out a worn cardigan, draping it over Lena's shoulders. "There's a women's shelter about 2 miles from here, St. Catherine's. They'll take you in, no questions asked." "Thank you," Lena whispered, but she didn't move. A women's shelter. Was that what she'd become? A charity case? A woman so broken that strangers offered her their sweaters? Doris squeezed her shoulder once, gently, and moved on to empty the trash cans. The cardigan smelled like lavender and cigarette smoke, and Lena pulled it tighter, hating how grateful she was for its warmth. She must have dozed off at some point, because the next thing she knew, someone was shaking her shoulder. Not Doris this time, but the security guard. "Ma'am, we're closing. You can't stay here." Lena blinked up at him, disoriented. The terminal was empty now, all the other passengers long gone. Through the windows she could see snow falling in thick, silent curtains. The temperature display on the wall read 18 degrees. "Where am I supposed to go?" The question came out smaller than she'd intended. The guard's expression softened slightly. "The shelter on 5th Street, St. Catherine's. They're open all night." So she walked, through snow that quickly soaked through her heels, making each step a small agony. The city at 3 in the morning was a different place entirely. Empty streets that echoed with her footsteps, windows dark or glowing with the blue light of insomnia. She passed a 24-hour convenience store where the clerk watched her through the window with wary eyes. A closed coffee shop where someone had written, "We're all just walking each other home," in the frost on the glass. By the time she reached St. Catherine's, Lena was shaking so hard she could barely ring the bell. A woman in jeans and a sweatshirt opened the door, took one look at her, and pulled her inside. "Good Lord, you're freezing. Come on, let's get you warmed up." The shelter was small, clean, and nearly full. Rows of cots held sleeping women, some with children curled beside them. The intake volunteer, her name was Janet, brought Lena a cup of terrible coffee and a blanket, asking gentle questions that Lena answered in a monotone. No, she wasn't in danger. No, she didn't need medical attention. Yes, she'd eaten today, technically, though the anniversary dinner had ended before the main course. "You can stay for up to 30 days, Janet explained, showing her to an empty cot in the corner. "We serve breakfast at 7, and there's a job board if you're looking for work. We also have counseling services if you want to talk to someone." Lena nodded mechanically, lying down on the thin mattress that smelled of industrial detergent and other people's desperation. Around her, women slept or pretended to sleep, each wrapped in their own private catastrophes. She wondered what had brought them here. Bad luck? Bad choices? Bad bodies that couldn't do what bodies were supposed to do? She didn't sleep. Instead, she stared at the ceiling and replayed the past 3 years in her mind like a prosecution presenting evidence. The first miscarriage, at 8 weeks, that Marcus had called just one of those things. The second, at 12 weeks, when she'd seen the flicker of a heartbeat on the ultrasound one day, and silence the next. The fertility treatments, the hormones that made her feel like a stranger in her own skin, the tests and procedures and appointments that gradually transformed their marriage from a partnership into a medical project. And through it all, Marcus's growing distance, the way he'd started working later, coming home after she'd already gone to bed, the way he'd stopped touching her except when they were trying, as if her body was only valuable for its reproductive potential. The way he'd looked at her tonight, across the table at that expensive restaurant, and she'd known before he even opened his mouth that she was about to lose everything. "You're defective." The word played on repeat in her mind. Defective. Like a product with a manufacturing flaw. Like something that belonged in a clearance bin with a big red sticker marking it down until someone desperate enough might take a chance on it. Dawn came gray and grudging through the shelter's windows. Women began to stir, children whimpered, and the smell of industrial coffee filled the air. Lena forced herself up, her body aching from the hard cot and the cold that had settled into her joints. In the communal bathroom, she washed her face and tried to do something with her hair, but the woman in the mirror was barely recognizable. This wasn't the polished attorney's wife who'd spent 6 years hosting dinner parties and attending charity galas. This was someone else entirely. Someone hollowed out and rebuilt from cheaper materials. Breakfast was oatmeal and toast, served by volunteers who smiled with practiced kindness. Lena ate mechanically, forcing down food that tasted like cardboard, listening to the conversations around her. Women comparing job leads. A mother trying to soothe a crying baby. 2 teenagers laughing about something on a phone, their resilience somehow more heartbreaking than their presence in a homeless shelter. After breakfast, Lena found herself standing in front of the job board, studying the index cards pinned there with desperate hope. Warehouse work, retail, cleaning services, childcare. The irony of that last one nearly made her laugh. She had a master's degree in art history and 6 years of experience managing a household and a law firm's social calendar, but none of that translated into employable skills. Marcus had wanted her to be a wife, not a worker. He discouraged her from taking jobs, saying he made enough for both of them, that her role was to make their home beautiful and their social life successful. And she'd agreed, because she'd loved him, because she'd thought they were building something together. Looking for work? Lena turned to find an older woman, maybe 50, with tired eyes and capable hands. She wore scrubs and carried a coffee cup with "World's Okayest Nurse" printed on the side. "I don't know," Lena admitted. "I don't know what I'm qualified to do." The woman studied her for a moment. "You speak well, carry yourself like you're educated. What's your background?" "Art history, museum curation, but that was a long time ago." Lena's voice cracked slightly. "I've been out of the workforce for 6 years." The woman pulled out her phone, scrolled for a moment, then showed Lena the screen. "My daughter runs an art gallery downtown. Small operation, but she needs someone to help with estate sales, appraisals, that kind of thing. Pay's not great, but it's something. Want me to send her your information?" Lena stared at the phone, at this unexpected lifeline being offered by a stranger. "I don't have information. I don't have a resume or references or anything." "Then we'll make them up," the woman said firmly. "What's your name?" "Lena. Lena Moore." "I'm Patricia Vance. Nice to meet you, Lena Moore. Now, give me your phone number and I'll have Sarah call you this afternoon." As Lena recited her number, something small and fragile began to unfurl in her chest. Not hope exactly. Hope was too bold a word for what she was feeling. But maybe possibility. Maybe the first tentative suggestion that this wasn't necessarily the end of everything. The day passed in a blur of administrative necessities. Lena used the shelter's computer to check her bank account, $187.43. And yes, Marcus had already canceled the credit cards. She Googled cheap apartments and felt her stomach drop at the prices. Even a studio in the worst part of town required first and last month's rent, plus a security deposit. She needed at least $2,000 just to have a place to sleep that wasn't a cot in a shelter. Her phone rang at 2 o'clock. A woman named Sarah Vance, who spoke quickly and enthusiastically about her gallery, about an estate sale she was organizing for a collector who died with no family, about how she desperately needed someone who could tell a Rembrandt from a reproduction and who wouldn't try to sell everything on eBay. "Can you start Monday?" Sarah asked. "It's cash under the table for now, $20 an hour, and if it works out, we'll make it official." "Yes," Lena said, not even asking what the hours were or whether she'd be able to get there. "Yes, thank you." After the call ended, Lena did the math. If she worked 40 hours a week, that was $800. After taxes, well, no taxes if it was cash, she could maybe afford a room somewhere. Not an apartment, but a room. A place with a door she could close. The weekend crept by with excruciating slowness. Lena spent Saturday at the public library, using their computers to piece together a resume from memory and lies. She listed her master's degree, her brief time working at a museum before she'd married Marcus, and carefully worded descriptions of freelance consulting for the 6 years she'd been Mrs. Marcus Whitmore. On Sunday, she allowed herself to visit a thrift store, spending $40 precious on work-appropriate clothes, slacks that were slightly too big, blouses that had seen better decades, a winter coat that had a broken zipper but was warm. The woman at the register looked at her with knowing eyes and threw in a scarf for free. "For luck," she said, and Lena had to turn away before the kindness undid her completely. Monday morning arrived cold and bright. Lena dressed in her thrift store clothes, twisted her hair into a bun, and took 3 buses to reach the gallery. Sarah Vance turned out to be in her late 20s, with purple streaks in her hair and an infectious enthusiasm for art that reminded Lena of who she used to be, back when she'd believed beauty could save you. "Oh, thank God," Sarah said when Lena walked in. "You look competent. Please tell me you're competent." "I'm competent," Lena said, and was surprised to find she meant it. The work was exactly what Lena needed, consuming enough to keep her mind occupied, but engaging enough to remind her that she had value beyond her reproductive organs. The estate belonged to a man named Harold Chen, who'd spent 40 years collecting everything from Ming Dynasty vases to early American folk art. His apartment was a testament to a life lived in pursuit of beauty, and as Lena moved through the rooms, cataloging and appraising, she felt something in her chest loosen slightly. She was good at this. She'd forgotten, but she was good at this. Sarah watched her work for the first few hours, then relaxed visibly. Mom said you were out of practice, but damn, you know your stuff. It comes back, Lena said, running her fingers over a carved jade figure that was probably worth more than her wedding ring. Like riding a bicycle. By the end of the week, Lena had cataloged half the collection and proven herself valuable enough that Sarah offered her steady hours. They fell into an easy rhythm, Sarah handling the business side while Lena managed the acquisitions and appraisals. The pay was still modest, but it was regular, and regular felt like luxury after the chaos of the past 2 weeks. Lena used her first paycheck to rent a room in a house owned by a woman named Margaret, who asked no questions and accepted cash. The room was small, barely big enough for a bed and a dresser, with a window that looked out onto an alley, but it had a lock on the door and it was hers. And when Lena closed that door on her first night there, she sat on the floor and cried until she had nothing left. March arrived with the false promise of spring. A few warm days that melted the snow, followed by a storm that reminded everyone that winter wasn't done yet. Lena had been at the gallery for 3 weeks, and she was starting to remember what it felt like to be a person rather than a problem. Sarah had officially hired her, with taxes and everything, and had even mentioned the possibility of profit sharing if they had a good year. It was on one of those deceptively warm days that Evan Carter walked into the gallery. Lena noticed him immediately, the way you notice someone who seems to carry their own weather system. He was tall, maybe 6'2", with dark hair going silver at the temples, and eyes that looked like they'd seen things they wished they could forget. He wore an expensive suit with the casual confidence of someone who'd forgotten he was wearing it, and he moved through the gallery with the careful attention of a man who was trying very hard to focus on anything other than whatever was haunting him. "Can I help you?" Lena asked, sliding into her professional mode. He turned to look at her, and for a moment, something flickered in his expression. Recognition, maybe, though they'd never met. Or perhaps just the acknowledgement of one broken person spotting another. "I'm looking for something for my daughter," he said. His voice was rough, like he didn't use it enough. "She's turning 12. She likes art." "What kind of art?" "I have no idea." He ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident. "I'm not good at this. Her mother would have known exactly what to get her, but her mother's gone, and I'm apparently terrible at being both parents." The admission was so raw, so honest, that Lena felt her professional mask slip slightly. "I'm sorry for your loss." 3 years ago, he said. "Car accident. I keep thinking it'll get easier, but it doesn't. It just gets different." Lena understood that in a way she hadn't before Marcus threw those divorce papers at her. Grief wasn't just for death. It was for every version of yourself you'd lost along the way. "Tell me about your daughter," she said. "Not about what her mother would have chosen, about what you see her respond to." Evan thought for a moment. "She draws constantly. Notebooks full of these intricate designs, buildings and bridges and cities that don't exist. She likes structure, but also beauty. Does that make sense?" It makes perfect sense. Lena led him to a section of the gallery where they had architectural prints and technical drawings. "What about something like this? The elevation drawings of classic buildings. They're art, but they're also blueprints, beauty and structure together." He studied the prints, and slowly, something in his posture eased. Yeah, she'd love this. He selected 3 prints: the Chrysler Building, the Golden Gate Bridge, and Frank Lloyd Wright's Falling Water. "Can you frame them?" "We can. They'll be ready in a week." As Lena wrote up the order, Evan watched her with an intensity that should have been uncomfortable, but somehow wasn't. "Have we met before?" "I don't think so." "You just seem—" He trailed off, shook his head. "Never mind. Thank you for your help. I've been dreading this shopping trip for weeks, and you made it easy." After he left, Sarah appeared from the back room with raised eyebrows. "Do you know who that was?" "A customer with a daughter who likes architecture?" "That was Evan Carter, Carter Technologies. He's worth about $200 million. Sarah grinned. "And he couldn't take his eyes off you." Lena felt her face heat. "He was just grateful for the help." "Uh-huh, sure." But Sarah dropped it, moving on to discuss an upcoming auction. Lena tried to forget about Evan Carter, but a week later he was back, this time to pick up the framed prints. And then he was back the week after that, browsing with no apparent purpose. And then again, until it became clear that he wasn't coming for the art. "I'm not good at this," he finally admitted on his 4th visit, standing in front of a painting he'd looked at 3 times before. At whatever this is supposed to be. What's supposed to be? Lena asked, though she knew. I haven't been interested in anyone since Anna died. Haven't wanted to be. But you, he turned to face her directly. There's something about you, something that makes me want to figure out how to be a person again, instead of just a father and a CEO. Lena's heart hammered against her ribs. I'm not looking for anything right now. I just got divorced. I'm barely keeping myself together. I know the feeling, Evan said quietly. Maybe that's why this feels like it might work. We're both disasters. We could be disasters together. Despite herself, Lena smiled. That's possibly the worst pitch I've ever heard. I'm out of practice. But he smiled back, and the expression transformed his face from handsome to devastating. Have coffee with me. Just coffee. If it's terrible, you never have to see me again. She should have said no, should have protected herself, built higher walls, remembered that she was defective and worthless, and not worth anyone's time. But something in Evan's eyes, that recognition of shared damage, of two people trying to figure out how to exist in the aftermath of loss, made her say yes instead. They had coffee, and then they had dinner, and then Evan invited her to meet his children, and Lena's carefully constructed walls began to crumble in the face of 3 kids who needed someone to see them as more than the children of a dead mother and a distant father. Maya, the 12-year-old artist, who showed Lena her notebooks full of impossible cities and asked if Lena thought they were stupid. They're extraordinary, Lena had said honestly, and watched Maya's face light up. 10-year-old Jackson, who was trying so hard to be the man of the house that he'd forgotten how to be a child, who asked Lena if she was going to leave like Mom did, and when Lena said she didn't know, had nodded like he'd expected nothing else. And Sophie, 7 years old, who'd decided within 5 minutes of meeting Lena that she needed someone to braid her hair and wasn't taking no for an answer. They like you, Evan said after that first meeting, walking Lena to her bus stop because she still couldn't afford a car. I like them, Lena admitted. But Evan, you need to know something about me, something that might change how you feel about all of this. So she told him about Marcus, about the miscarriages, about being called defective and thrown away, about living in a shelter and working for cash under the table and still sleeping in a rented room that smelled like mildew, about being broken in a way that couldn't be fixed. Evan listened without interrupting, and when she was done, he took her hand. I already have 3 kids, he said simply. I'm not looking for someone to give me more. I'm looking for someone who sees me, actually sees me, and who lets me see them back. Everything else is just details. And standing there in the cold March evening, holding hands with a man she barely knew but somehow understood completely, Lena felt something shift. Not healing, not yet, but maybe the first tentative acknowledgement that healing might be possible, that she might be possible. Not as someone's wife or someone's mother or someone's anything, but as herself. Complicated and damaged and still standing. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Spring arrived in fits and starts, the city unable to decide whether it was ready to let go of winter. Lena found herself caught in a similar state of uncertainty, suspended between the person she'd been and whoever she was becoming. Her days developed a rhythm that felt almost normal. Mornings at the gallery cataloging new acquisitions, afternoons working with Sarah on estate sales, evenings that increasingly involved Evan and his children. It should have been simple, 2 broken people finding comfort in shared damage. But nothing about Evan Carter was simple. You're spending a lot of time at that house, Margaret observed one evening when Lena came home late, her arms full of leftovers that Evan had insisted she take. Her landlady sat on the front porch despite the chill, smoking a cigarette and watching the street with the attention of someone who'd seen everything twice. He has 3 children who need help with homework, Lena said, deflecting. And I'm good at art history, which apparently covers 7th grade social studies. Mm-hmm. Margaret's tone suggested she wasn't buying it. Just be careful, honey. Rich men and broke women. That story usually ends one way, and it ain't pretty. Lena wanted to argue, but Margaret wasn't wrong to worry. The distance between Lena's rented room and Evan's house in the suburbs wasn't measured in miles, but in entire universes of experience. His world involved things like au pairs and college funds and vacation homes. Hers involved calculating whether she could afford both lunch and bus fare. But when she was with Evan and his kids, none of that seemed to matter. Lena, can you help me? Maya appeared in the doorway of Evan's home office one Saturday afternoon, clutching her sketchbook like a shield. I'm trying to draw the Eiffel Tower, but the perspective is all wrong. Lena set down the book she'd been reading and moved to look over Maya's shoulder. The drawing was actually quite good, but the girl was right. The vanishing point was slightly off, making the structure lean at an impossible angle. Here, Lena said, taking a pencil and lightly sketching guidelines. The key is to establish your horizon line first. Everything has to relate back to this point. See? Maya studied the corrections with fierce concentration. How do you know all this stuff? I studied art for a long time. Longer than I probably should have. Dad says you worked in a museum. For a little while, yes. Lena didn't mention that it had been almost a decade ago, in a life that felt like it belonged to someone else entirely. Why'd you stop? Maya asked, already implementing the perspective corrections with a steady hand that belied her age. Lena hesitated, unsure how much truth was appropriate for a 12-year-old. I got married. My husband wanted me to focus on being a wife. That's stupid. Maya's pronouncement was matter-of-fact. You're really smart. Why would anyone want you to stop using your brain? From the mouths of children came the most devastating truths. I don't know, sweetheart. I wish I had a better answer. They worked in companionable silence for a while, Maya's pencil scratching across paper while Lena offered occasional suggestions. Through the window, she could see Evan in the backyard with Jackson and Sophie, attempting to teach them how to throw a baseball. He was terrible at it, kept forgetting to follow through with his throwing arm, but the kids were laughing, and that seemed more important than technical accuracy. My mom used to help me with my art, Maya said suddenly, not looking up from her drawing. She wasn't as good as you at explaining things, but she always said my drawings were beautiful, even when they weren't. Lena's throat tightened. I'm not trying to replace your mom, Maya. I know. The girl finally looked up, her eyes, Evan's eyes, serious beyond her years. But Dad's been different since you've been around, less sad. And Jackson actually smiled at dinner last week, which basically never happens anymore. Your dad loves you all very much. I know that too. Maya returned to her drawing, adding detail to the ironwork with careful precision. But sometimes love isn't enough if you're too sad to show it properly. You make him less sad. That's good. The simplicity of the observation hit Lena harder than any of Marcus's elaborate justifications for why she wasn't enough. Children saw things adults spent years learning to ignore. That evening, after the kids were in bed, Evan found Lena in the kitchen, elbow deep in dishwater, because his dishwasher was broken and he hadn't gotten around to calling a repair person. She'd simply started washing dishes without asking, the way she'd started doing 100 small things around his house that needed doing. You don't have to do that, Evan said, picking up a towel to dry. I can hire someone. I know, but I'm already here and it needs doing, and I don't mind. Lena handed him a clean plate. Besides, it's meditative. Gives me time to think. What are you thinking about? Everything. Nothing. The way Maya had said, Dad's been different since you've been around, with such casual acceptance. The fact that Lena had started keeping a toothbrush in Evan's bathroom, along with a change of clothes, because she was spending more nights here than in her rented room. The way Sophie had started calling her Miss Lena, with the same tone she might use for a favorite teacher, affectionate but careful not to presume too much. I'm thinking that this is starting to feel real, Lena admitted, and that scares me. Evan set down the towel and turned to face her fully. It scares me too. I haven't let anyone this close since Anna died. Hell, I barely let Anna this close when she was alive. I was always working, always building the company, always convinced there'd be time later to be the husband and father I wanted to be. His voice went rough. And then there wasn't any more time, and I had to figure out how to be both parents with no idea what I was doing. You're doing better than you think. That's because you're here. He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the gesture so tender it made her chest ache. The kids are happier. I'm happier. The house feels like a home instead of a mausoleum. You did that. I just wash dishes and help with homework. You do a lot more than that, and you know it. Evan's hand lingered near her face, and Lena found herself leaning into the touch, despite every instinct screaming at her to protect herself. Lena, I know we're both damaged, I know we're both figuring this out as we go, but I need you to know that this, whatever this is, matters to me. You matter to me. The word should have been a gift, but all Lena could think about was Marcus saying, I want children, biological children, with the same tone someone might use to order lunch. She pulled back slightly, returning to the dishes with more force than necessary. Evan, I can't give you more children. You need to understand that. My body doesn't work right. I'm defective. Evan's voice was sharp now, anger flashing in his eyes. Is that what you were going to say? Because I swear to God, if you repeat that bastard's words one more time, I'm going to lose it. Lena froze, hands still in the dishwater. It's the truth. It's his truth. His cruel, small-minded truth that he used to justify throwing away someone he should have cherished. Evan moved closer, not touching her, but close enough that she could feel the heat of him. Lena, look at me. Please. She turned, meeting his eyes with reluctance. I have 3 children, Evan said clearly, as if speaking to someone who hadn't quite understood. 3 children who have lost their mother and are trying to figure out how to keep living anyway. I don't need more kids. I need help raising the ones I already have. I need someone who sees them as people, not obstacles or stepping stones or proof of their father's virility. I need someone who understands grief and doesn't expect them to be over it according to some arbitrary timeline. I'm not their mother, Lena whispered. No, you're not. You're Lena, and that's exactly who I want you to be. The kiss happened before either of them could overthink it. Gentle at first, tentative, both of them aware of all the ways this could go wrong. But then Evan's hands were in her hair, and Lena's arms were around his neck, and the kiss deepened into something that felt less like a question and more like an answer. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Evan rested his forehead against hers. Stay tonight. Not in the guest room. Stay with me. Every practical bone in Lena's body screamed no. This was too fast, too intense, too likely to end in disaster. But the part of her that had been slowly thawing since that night in the bus station whispered yes, and for once she listened to it. They were careful, conscious of the children sleeping down the hall, but later, lying in Evan's bed with his arm around her waist and his breath warm against her neck, Lena felt something she'd thought was lost forever. The sense of being wanted, not for what she could provide, but for who she was. The next morning brought the inevitable awkwardness of navigating breakfast with 3 children who were far too observant for anyone's comfort. Sophie took one look at Lena emerging from Evan's bedroom in yesterday's clothes and announced, "You slept in Daddy's room." "Yes, I did," Lena said, refusing to be embarrassed. Children could smell shame from a mile away. "Does that mean you're Daddy's girlfriend now?" Sophie pressed, spooning cereal into her mouth with more interest in the conversation than in breakfast. Evan intervened before Lena could formulate an answer. "That means Miss Lena and I care about each other very much, and we're figuring out what that means. Just like everything else in this family, we'll work it out together." Jackson, who'd been silent until now, finally spoke up. "Are you going to marry her?" The question hung in the air like a grenade with the pin pulled. Evan and Lena exchanged glances, and she saw her own panic reflected in his eyes. "Nobody's getting married anytime soon," Evan said carefully. "Right now we're just spending time together and getting to know each other better. Is that okay with you guys?" Maya shrugged with affected teenage indifference, but Lena caught the small smile she tried to hide. Jackson nodded slowly, still wary but willing to accept the explanation. Sophie just grinned and went back to her cereal, apparently satisfied with this development. Crisis averted. For now. The following weeks blurred together in a way that felt both exhilarating and terrifying. Lena still worked at the gallery during the day, but her evenings belonged to Evan's household. She helped Maya prepare for a school art show, taught Jackson how to cook basic meals so he'd feel more self-sufficient, and spent hours playing elaborate make-believe games with Sophie that involved rescued princesses who saved themselves. "You're basically living there," Sarah observed one afternoon at the gallery, sorting through a new acquisition of Art Deco jewelry. "When are you going to make it official?" "Make what official?" "Oh, come on, you keep a toothbrush there, you do their laundry, you know all their schedules by heart. Just move in already." "It's only been 2 months, Lena protested, though the truth was she'd been thinking the same thing. She was paying rent for a room she barely used, riding buses back and forth between two lives that were starting to feel like one life split by geography. 2 months? 2 years? What's the difference? You love him. He loves you. The kids love you. What are you waiting for? Lena didn't have a good answer. Fear, maybe. The lingering belief that this was all too good to be true, that eventually Evan would realize she wasn't worth the trouble, that she was still the defective woman Marcus had thrown away, just in prettier packaging. But that evening, when she arrived at Evan's house to find chaos, Jackson running a fever, Sophie crying because Maya had yelled at her, Maya locked in her room refusing to come out, and Evan looking like he was one crisis away from a breakdown, Lena didn't hesitate. She sent Evan to sit down, gave Jackson medicine, and put him to bed with a cool cloth on his forehead, convinced Maya to open her door by sliding a peace offering of chocolate under it, and sat with Sophie until the crying subsided into hiccups and finally into sleep. By the time order was restored, it was nearly midnight. Evan found Lena in the kitchen, making tea because she was too wired to sleep, and it was either that or start reorganizing his cabinets. I don't know how you do that, he said, accepting the mug she offered him. I would have just let everything burn. No, you wouldn't have. You would have figured it out. You always do. Not like you. Evan set down his tea and pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her in a hug that felt less romantic and more like a drowning man grabbing a lifeline. Move in with me. Officially. Stop pretending you live somewhere else when we both know you belong here. Lena's heart hammered against her ribs. Evan, that's a huge step. The kids already think of you as part of this family. Hell, Sophie asked me yesterday if we could change her emergency contact card at school to include you. He pulled back just enough to meet her eyes. I know it's fast. I know we're both still figuring out who we are after everything that's happened. But I also know that every day you're here is better than every day you're not. So move in, please. It was the please that did it. The vulnerability in that single word, coming from a man who ran a $200 million company and commanded rooms full of executives. He was asking, not demanding, offering, not taking. Okay, Lena heard herself say. Okay, yes. The logistics of moving were almost comically simple, given how little Lena owned. 1 carload of clothes, a few books, and the jade figure Sarah had given her as a bonus after a particularly profitable estate sale. Margaret hugged her goodbye and told her not to be a stranger, which made Lena cry because kindness still caught her off guard. Evan cleared out half his closet and a dresser, treating Lena's meager possessions with the same reverence he might show priceless artifacts. The kids helped her unpack, Sophie particularly excited about the prospect of Lena being there for breakfast every morning. Does this mean you can make pancakes on school days too? Sophie asked hopefully. I think we can manage that sometimes, Lena agreed, and was rewarded with a gap-toothed grin. But that night, alone in Evan's bedroom that was now their bedroom, Lena felt the full weight of what she'd agreed to. This wasn't just moving in with a boyfriend. This was becoming part of a family unit, taking on a role that had no clear definition. Not mother, she could never be that, and wouldn't presume to try. But not just girlfriend either. Something in between, something that required her to show up every day for children who'd already lost one important woman in their lives. You're thinking too loud, Evan murmured, pulling her closer. I can practically hear your brain spinning. I'm terrified I'm going to screw this up, Lena admitted. That I'll do something wrong and hurt them, or they'll decide they don't actually want me here, or you'll be human and make mistakes, and we'll all figure it out together, like families do. Evan kissed her temple. Stop trying to be perfect, Lena. We don't need perfect. We just need you. The words should have been comforting, but Lena had spent 6 years with Marcus learning that just being herself was never enough. That she needed to be prettier, more social, more fertile, more anything other than what she was. Unlearning that lesson was proving harder than she'd anticipated. The first real test came 2 weeks after she moved in, when Maya's school art show arrived and the girl announced she wasn't going. I don't want to, Maya said flatly, arms crossed in defensive posture that reminded Lena painfully of herself. My stuff isn't good enough. Everyone else's parents will be there talking about how talented their kids are, and Dad will have to pretend mine doesn't suck. Your work is exceptional, Lena said firmly, and your dad thinks you hung the moon. That's because he's my dad. He has to think that. Maya's voice cracked slightly. Mom would have told me the truth. She would have known if my stuff was actually good or just okay. There it was, the real issue, the ghost that haunted every corner of this house, no matter how much they all pretended otherwise. Lena sat down on Maya's bed, choosing her words carefully. You're right, your mom would have known, because she knew you in ways that I don't and probably never will. But Maya, she also would have told you to be brave enough to show your work anyway, because art isn't about being perfect. It's about having the courage to share your vision of the world, even when it scares you. How do you know what she would have said? You never even met her. I know because I've seen the paintings she made that your dad keeps in his office. I know because you're her daughter, and you have her eyes and probably her heart too. And I know because any woman who raised a kid as thoughtful and talented as you would want her to be brave. Maya was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. When she finally spoke, her voice was small. Will you come to the show? Not just Dad? You too? I'll be there, Lena promised. Front row, ready to tell anyone who'll listen that your perspective work is extraordinary. The art show was held in the school gymnasium, transformed with questionable success into something resembling a gallery. Student work covered every available wall space, ranging from earnest elementary school finger paintings to surprisingly sophisticated high school pieces. Maya's architectural drawings were displayed near the center, and Lena felt a surge of pride seeing them properly mounted and lit. Those are really something, said a woman standing nearby, studying Maya's work. Your daughter? Lena opened her mouth to correct her, to explain that she was just the girlfriend, just the woman who helped with homework, just the person who happened to be around. But then she saw Maya watching them from across the room, her expression anxious and hopeful, and something shifted. Yes, Lena said. Yes, she is. It wasn't true, not legally, not biologically, but it wasn't entirely a lie either. Maya was becoming hers in all the ways that mattered, in late-night talks about art and life, in shared moments of understanding, in the gradual building of trust between two people who both knew what it meant to feel inadequate. Later, driving home with a blue ribbon in Maya's lap and Sophie asleep in the back seat, Evan reached over and squeezed Lena's hand. Thank you, he said quietly. For what? For showing up, for meaning it, for making them believe that people don't always leave. Lena squeezed back, her throat tight with emotions she couldn't quite name, because the truth was, she was starting to believe it too. That maybe, just maybe, she'd found a place where her particular kind of broken fit perfectly with other people's broken pieces. That a family wasn't defined by biology, but by showing up, day after day, even when it was hard. And it was hard. There were nights when Jackson's grief manifested as anger, and he said cruel things he didn't mean. Mornings when Sophie clung to Lena with the desperation of a child who'd learned that people could disappear without warning. Afternoons when Maya retreated into herself and refused all comfort, needing to feel her sadness fully before she could move past it. But there were also good moments. Jackson teaching Lena how to play his favorite video game with patient determination. Sophie making cards for Lena's desk at the gallery, each one decorated with elaborate drawings and declarations of love spelled with creative phonetics. Maya asking Lena's opinion on which colleges had the best architecture programs, 4 years early, but with the serious planning of someone who'd learned that life could change without warning. And through it all, Evan. Learning alongside her, both of them figuring out how to build something new from the wreckage of what they'd lost. Some nights they talked until dawn about everything and nothing. Other nights they simply held each other, the silence more meaningful than any words. 3 months after Lena moved in, Evan's company announced a major acquisition that required him to travel to San Francisco for 2 weeks. He asked Lena to come with him, but someone needed to stay with the kids, and they both knew it should be her. Are you sure? Evan asked the night before he left, packing with the methodical efficiency of someone who traveled frequently for business. I can hire someone. The au pair agency has people available. The kids don't need a stranger, Lena said. They need consistency. They'll be fine. I know they will. You're amazing with them. He stopped packing and turned to face her fully. Sometimes I wonder what I did to deserve you walking into my life. You noticed someone who needed help and didn't look away, Lena said simply. That's rarer than you think. Those 2 weeks tested everything Lena had learned about being part of a family. Jackson got in a fight at school and had to be picked up early. Sophie came down with strep throat and needed constant attention. Maya had a crisis of confidence about an upcoming exam and needed hours of patient encouragement. But Lena handled it, all of it, because somewhere between moving in and now, these children had become hers to care for. Not because she'd given birth to them, but because she showed up every day and chose them, and they were slowly choosing her back. When Evan returned, he found his household not just surviving, but thriving. The kids were happy, homework was done, everyone had been fed actual vegetables, and Lena looked exhausted but triumphant. How did it go? She asked, helping him bring in his luggage. The acquisition went through. Carter Technologies just got significantly bigger. But he wasn't looking at his briefcase when he said it. He was looking at her. Marry me. Lena froze. What? Marry me. Not because I need you to, or because it makes legal sense, or because of the kids. Marry me because I love you, and I want to spend whatever time we have left on this planet making sure you never doubt your worth again. Evan, we've only been together 5 months. People will think we're crazy. Let them. He moved closer, taking her hands in his. Lena, I've spent the last 3 years in a fog, just trying to get through each day without falling apart. You didn't just pull me out of that fog, you reminded me that there was light on the other side of it. You've been a partner to me and a guiding presence for my kids, and you've done it all while rebuilding yourself from scratch. If that's not love, I don't know what is. I can't give you more children, Lena said, the old wound opening fresh. I know you say it doesn't matter, but what if someday it does? What if you change your mind? I won't. You don't know that. Yes, I do. Evan's voice was fierce now, certain. Because I know what matters and what doesn't. Biology doesn't matter. Matching holiday cards don't matter. What matters is that when I was drowning, you taught me how to breathe again. What matters is that my children, our children, are learning from you that love isn't about being perfect. It's about showing up even when you're scared. Lena felt tears sliding down her cheeks, and she didn't bother wiping them away. This is the worst proposal ever. You're supposed to have a ring and a plan, and I have a ring. Had it for 3 weeks, carrying it around waiting for the right moment. He pulled a small box from his jacket pocket, opening it to reveal a simple platinum band with a single diamond. And my plan is to spend every day proving to you that you're enough exactly as you are. So what do you say, Lena Moore? Will you marry this disaster of a man and his 3 chaotic children and help us figure out how to be a family? She should have been cautious, should have asked for time to think, to weigh the risks, to protect herself from potential heartbreak. But Lena had spent too long playing it safe. And where had that gotten her? Thrown away like trash and sleeping in a shelter. This was different. This was Evan, who saw all her broken pieces and wanted her anyway. This was 3 children who needed her not because she was perfect, but because she was there. This was love, messy and imperfect and absolutely terrifying. Yes, Lena whispered. Yes, I'll marry you. The kiss that followed was interrupted by excited squealing from the stairway, where all 3 children were apparently eavesdropping. I knew it! Sophie shouted, running down to hug them both. I told Jackson you were going to get married. Did you bet on this? Evan asked, eyebrows raised. $5, Jackson admitted, grinning for maybe the 3rd time since Lena had met him. Which Maya now owes me because she said Dad would chicken out. I said he'd take longer than 2 weeks, Maya corrected, but she was smiling too, and when she hugged Lena, she whispered, Thank you for staying. And in that moment, surrounded by noise and chaos and the beautiful mess of this family that had chosen her back, Lena finally understood what Evan had been trying to tell her all along. She was enough, not despite her inability to have biological children, but independent of it entirely. Her worth wasn't determined by what her body could or couldn't do. It was determined by how she showed up, day after day, for the people who needed her. She was enough just as she was. The engagement should have been the beginning of everything falling into place, but life had a way of complicating even the happiest moments. Lena woke the morning after Evan's proposal to find Maya sitting at the kitchen table, staring at her phone with an expression that made Lena's stomach drop. "What's wrong?" Lena asked, pouring coffee with hands that suddenly felt unsteady. Maya turned the phone around without a word. The screen showed a text message from someone named Bryce. "Heard your dad's marrying some random woman. Guess your real mom didn't matter that much after all." The cruelty of children never ceased to amaze Lena. She sat down across from Maya, choosing her words carefully. "Do you feel that way? That I'm trying to replace your mother?" "No." Maya's voice was small but certain. "But other people will think that. They'll think Dad forgot about Mom, or that we forgot about her and it's not true. We think about her every day." "I know you do." Lena reached across the table, waiting until Maya took her hand. "And I would never ask you to stop. Your mother was an extraordinary woman who loved you more than anything in the world. I'm not here to take her place. I'm here to add something new. There's room in your heart for both of us." "What if people say mean things at school?" "Then you tell them the truth, that your family is learning how to be happy again, and that takes courage, not forgetting. And if they still don't understand, that's their problem, not yours." Maya nodded slowly, but the worry didn't leave her eyes entirely. Lena made a mental note to talk to Evan about getting the kids into counseling, if they weren't already. Blending a family was complicated enough without the added weight of grief that hadn't fully healed. The decision to keep the wedding small was less about preference and more about self-preservation. Evan had suggested a big celebration, inviting his business associates and extended family, but Lena had gently pushed back. She wasn't ready to stand in front of hundreds of people who'd compare her to Anna, who'd wonder what Evan saw in the divorced woman who worked at a gallery. A small ceremony felt safer, more authentic to what they were actually building. "Just us and the kids," Lena had said. "And maybe Sarah, if that's okay. She's the closest thing I have to family." Evan had agreed immediately, seeming almost relieved. "I'll ask my brother to stand up with me. Mike's been asking when he gets to meet you anyway." The mention of family made Lena nervous in ways she hadn't anticipated. She had no one to invite, no parents to introduce to Evan's relatives, no childhood friends to serve as bridesmaids. Her life before Marcus had been small and quiet, and her life during their marriage had been entirely absorbed into his world. Now she was starting over with nothing but herself and the fragments she'd managed to salvage. Planning the wedding became an exercise in navigating invisible landmines. Every decision seemed to carry the weight of Anna's ghost. Jackson casually mentioned that his mom had loved roses, which immediately made Lena want to choose any other flower. Sophie asked if Lena would wear a white dress, like Mommy did. And Lena had to explain gently that she'd probably wear something simpler, something that felt like her. "What did your first wedding look like, Mike?" Maya asked one afternoon, while they were supposed to be doing homework, but had gotten sidetracked into wedding logistics. Lena thought back to that day, which felt like it had happened to someone else entirely. "Big, very formal. My ex-husband's family had money and opinions, and I went along with whatever they wanted because I thought that's what you did." "Did you like it?" "Honestly, I felt like I was playing dress-up in someone else's life." Lena closed Maya's math textbook, recognizing they weren't going to get back on track. "This time, I want something that feels real, small and honest, and about the actual commitment, not the show." "Good," Maya said firmly, "because big fancy weddings are basically just expensive parties where everyone judges your choices." "Who hurt you?" Lena asked, laughing despite herself. "Bryce's sister got married last year. $40,000 for one day. My mom said it was obscene." Maya paused, then added carefully, "She would have liked you, I think. You're practical like she was." The compliment landed with unexpected weight. Lena had been so worried about disrespecting Anna's memory that she hadn't considered the possibility that Anna might have actually approved of her, that maybe the ghost she'd been so afraid of wasn't judging her at all. Evan's brother Mike arrived 2 days before the wedding, and Lena understood immediately why Evan had been nervous about the introduction. Mike was everything Evan wasn't: loud, gregarious, the kind of person who treated strangers like old friends and had opinions about everything. He also had the family resemblance that made it clear these two had grown up together, finishing each other's sentences and communicating in the shorthand of siblings who'd survived the same childhood. "So you're the woman who finally got my brother to stop moping around like a Victorian widow." Mike said when they met, pulling Lena into a hug before she could offer a handshake. Anna would have liked you. That's the second time someone said that this week, Lena managed, extricating herself from the embrace. Did you know her well? She was my sister-in-law for 15 years. Yeah, I knew her. Mike's expression turned serious. And I know she'd want Evan to be happy again. She'd want the kids to have someone who gives a damn. So thank you for being that person. The gratitude in his voice made Lena's throat tight. She'd been so focused on whether she deserved this family that she hadn't considered how much they might actually need her. The rehearsal dinner was held at the house, just the 7 of them around the dining table that Lena had gradually transformed from a utilitarian eating space into something warmer. She'd added a tablecloth she'd found at a thrift store, candles that Sophie had picked out, and a centerpiece that Maya had created from branches and wire that looked like abstract art. This is nice, Mike observed, looking around at the house that had clearly been touched by Lena's presence. When I was here 6 months ago, this place looked like a museum. Now it looks like people actually live here. Lena did that, Jackson said, speaking up with more confidence than Lena was used to hearing from him. She made everything better. Not better, Lena corrected gently. Just different. Your dad was doing fine before I got here. Dad was surviving, Maya interjected. That's not the same as fine. Evan reached over and squeezed Lena's hand, his eyes saying what he couldn't put into words with his children and brother watching. That she had made things better, that she'd brought light back into a house that had been dark for too long, that he loved her in ways he was still learning to articulate. After the kids went to bed, the 3 adults sat on the back porch despite the spring chill, drinking wine and talking the way people do when they're trying to get to know each other in compressed time. Mike told stories about growing up with Evan, painting a picture of a serious older brother who'd always been too responsible, too careful, too worried about doing everything right. Anna loosened him up, Mike said, his voice going soft with memory. She was spontaneous in a way Evan never was. Balanced him out. He looked at Lena directly. You do that too, but differently. You make him think about things he'd rather ignore. That's good. He needs that. What things? Lena asked, genuinely curious. Feelings, mostly. Evan's default mode is to intellectualize everything, turn emotions into problems he can solve with logic and planning. But you can't logic your way through grief or love or any of the messy human stuff. Mike refilled his wine glass. Anna understood that too, but she dealt with it by pulling him into the moment. You deal with it by making him actually talk about what he's feeling. Different approach, same result. Lena had never thought about it that way, but Mike was right. She and Evan spent hours talking about everything. Their fears about raising the kids, their own childhood wounds, their hopes for what this blended family could become. It was exhausting and terrifying and absolutely necessary. I'm scared I'm going to screw this up, Lena admitted, the wine loosening her tongue. I have no idea what I'm doing. I've never been a parent, never been part of a family that actually worked. What if I make everything worse? Then you'll fix it, Mike said simply. That's what family does. You screw up, you apologize, you try harder next time. The kids know you're not perfect, and they don't need you to be. They just need you to keep showing up. The wedding day dawned bright and unseasonably warm, the kind of spring morning that felt like a gift. Lena woke early, alone in the guest room where she'd spent the night at Evan's insistence that they should do at least one tradition properly. She could hear sounds from downstairs. Sophie's excited chatter, Jackson's lower voice trying to calm her down, Maya probably still asleep because 12-year-olds could sleep through anything. Sarah arrived at 8 with coffee, bagels, and the dress Lena had chosen after weeks of searching. It wasn't white. Lena had felt too old and too divorced for white, but a soft champagne color that caught the light beautifully. Simple, elegant, appropriate for a backyard ceremony with 7 people. You ready for this? Sarah asked, helping Lena into the dress that fit perfectly because Sarah had insisted on taking her to a tailor. I think so. Lena studied herself in the mirror, seeing a woman she barely recognized. Not the polished attorney's wife who'd tried so hard to be perfect. Not the broken woman who'd sat in a bus station convinced she had no value. But someone new, someone still figuring out who she was, but at least moving in the right direction. He's lucky to have you, Sarah said, zipping up the dress. You know that, right? I think we're lucky to have each other. The ceremony was held in the backyard under the oak tree that Evan said Anna had loved, which had initially made Lena nervous until Maya explained that her mom would have wanted important family moments to happen there. The officiant was a judge who owed Evan a favor and had agreed to come out on a Saturday for a quick ceremony. Mike stood next to Evan, while Sarah stood next to Lena, and the three children sat in chairs arranged in a small semicircle, bearing witness to their family becoming official. Lena had written her own vows, ignoring the traditional promises that had failed her so spectacularly the first time. When it was her turn to speak, she looked at Evan and told the truth. I came into your life broken, convinced I had nothing left to offer. You saw me differently. You saw someone worth knowing, worth loving, worth building a life with. You taught me that family isn't about biology or perfection. It's about showing up every day and choosing each other, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. She glanced at the kids, including them in her words. You all taught me that, so I promise to keep showing up. I promise to love you through the messy parts and the beautiful parts and all the ordinary parts in between. I promise to help raise these extraordinary children with the respect and care they deserve. And I promise that when I inevitably screw up, I'll own it and fix it and try harder the next day. Evan's vows were shorter but no less meaningful. I promise to never make you feel like you're not enough. I promise to build a life with you, not just for you. I promise that our love will be a partnership of equals, not a rescue mission. And I promise that every day I'll try to be worthy of the gift you've given me, the gift of believing life could be good again. When the judge pronounced them married and Evan kissed her, Lena heard Sophie cheer and Jackson's slightly embarrassed applause, and Maya's quieter but genuine happiness. And she thought about that night in the bus station, sitting in the cold with nothing but shame and fear, absolutely certain her life was over. How wrong she'd been. Her life hadn't ended that night. It had just been waiting to begin. The celebration afterward was simple: a catered lunch in the backyard, a cake that Sophie had helped decorate with more enthusiasm than skill, and toast that made Lena cry in the best possible way. Mike told embarrassing stories about Evan's childhood. Sarah talked about meeting Lena at her lowest point and watching her rebuild herself into someone stronger. The kids gave a joint speech that Maya had clearly written, talking about how weird it had been at first, but how they were glad Lena had become part of their family. You're not our mom, Maya read from her notes, her voice steady. But you're ours anyway, and that's enough. As the afternoon wore on and guests drifted into comfortable conversation, Lena found herself standing under the oak tree with Evan, watching their makeshift family interact in the golden light of late afternoon. Mike was teaching Jackson some kind of card trick. Sarah and Sophie were examining the flower arrangements with serious concentration. Maya was taking photos on her phone, documenting the day with the artistic eye that would probably get her into a good college someday. Happy? Evan asked, sliding an arm around her waist. Terrified, Lena admitted. But yes, happy too. Good terrified or bad terrified? Good, I think. The kind where you're afraid of losing something because you finally have something worth losing. She leaned into him, letting herself be held. Is that weird? If it is, we're both weird together. Evan kissed the top of her head. Thank you for saying yes. Thank you for being brave enough to try this with me. The sun was setting when Mike pulled Lena aside, his expression more serious than she'd seen all day. I need to tell you something, and I need you to really hear it. Lena braced herself, unsure what was coming. Evan's going to struggle sometimes, Mike said carefully. He's going to have days where the grief hits him out of nowhere, and he's going to feel guilty for being happy with you because some broken part of his brain thinks that means he's betraying Anna. When that happens, don't take it personally. Just remind him that loving you doesn't diminish what he had with her, that the heart has infinite capacity, and using some of it for you doesn't mean there's less left for her memory. Has he talked to you about this? Lena asked, her chest tight. He doesn't have to. I know my brother. Mike's smile was sad. He's going to try to protect you from his complicated feelings, which means he's going to bottle them up until they come out sideways. Don't let him. Make him talk about it, even when it's uncomfortable. I will. Thank you for telling me. That's what family does, Mike said, echoing his words from the night before. We tell each other the hard truths. The day ended with all of them exhausted and happy, the kids in bed by 9 and the adults not far behind. Lena lay in bed next to her husband, what a strange and wonderful word, and tried to process everything that had changed in the past 6 months, from homeless to married, from worthless to wanted, from broken to becoming whole. "What are you thinking about?" Evan asked in the darkness. "Everything, nothing. How weird life is." Lena rolled over to face him. 6 months ago, I was convinced my life was over. Now I'm married to you and trying to figure out how to be a stepmother to 3 kids who didn't ask for any of this. They asked for you specifically, actually. The night I was planning to propose, I talked to them first. Told them I wanted to marry you, but only if they were okay with it. You know what Maya said? What? She said what? Dad, if you don't marry her, you're an idiot. She's the best thing that's happened to us in years. Evan's voice was thick with emotion. Jackson said you make the house feel safe again, and Sophie said she loved you and wanted you to stay forever. Lena felt tears sliding down her face in the darkness. You didn't tell me that. I'm telling you now, you're not just here because I love you, though I do, desperately. You're here because all of us love you, because you've become essential to this family in ways I don't think you fully understand yet. They made love slowly, carefully, with the kind of tenderness that comes from knowing this is no longer temporary. That morning wouldn't bring separation or doubt, that they were in this together, for better or worse, and they were choosing to believe it would be mostly better. Afterward, Lena lay awake listening to Evan breathe beside her, this man who'd seen her at her worst and loved her anyway. She thought about Marcus and the cold way he'd thrown her away, and she felt grateful for the first time. Grateful that he'd been cruel enough to force her out of a life that was slowly suffocating her. Grateful that she'd ended up in that bus station on that particular night, cold and broken, but still breathing. Because if she hadn't been there, she never would have found this. This family, this love, this second chance at becoming who she was always meant to be. The honeymoon period lasted approximately 2 weeks before reality reasserted itself with force. Lena came home from the gallery one afternoon to find Jackson in tears at the kitchen table, a letter from school lying in front of him. She read it quickly. He'd been caught cheating on a math test and was facing a week's suspension. "I'm sorry," Jackson sobbed, his face blotchy and miserable. "I'm so sorry. Please don't tell Dad. He's going to be so disappointed." Lena sat down beside him, her mind racing through appropriate responses. What would a real parent do in this situation? What would Evan want her to do? What was the right balance between compassion and consequence? "Why did you cheat?" she asked, keeping her voice neutral. "I don't know. I've been behind all year, and everyone else seems to get it, and I just wanted to not feel stupid for once." Jackson wiped his nose on his sleeve. "I know it was wrong. I know I shouldn't have, but I was desperate." "Okay. So let's talk about the real problem, which isn't the cheating. That's just a symptom. The real problem is that you're struggling in math and didn't ask for help." Lena pulled out her phone. "Does your school have tutoring services?" "I guess. I don't know. We're going to find out, and we're going to get you a tutor, and we're going to figure out what you're missing and fix it. But Jackson, you still have to accept the consequences of your choice. You're going to be suspended, and you're going to tell your dad what happened, and it's going to be uncomfortable. That's how we learn." "He's going to hate me," Jackson whispered. "He's going to be disappointed, which is not the same as hate. He's going to be upset that you made a bad choice, but he's also going to help you fix it. That's what parents do." When Evan came home and they told him together, his reaction was exactly what Lena had predicted. Disappointment, yes, but also concern about why Jackson had felt he couldn't ask for help. They spent an hour discussing consequences and support systems, and by the end, Jackson looked exhausted but relieved. "I thought you'd yell," Jackson admitted to Evan. "I'm too tired to yell," Evan said honestly. "But I am disappointed, not in you as a person, but in the choice you made. There's a difference." After Jackson went to bed, Evan pulled Lena close. "Thank you for handling that so well. I would have just gotten angry and made it worse. I didn't handle it well. I just did what seemed right and hoped for the best." "That's called parenting," Evan said with a tired smile. "Welcome to the club." The suspension forced all of them to recalibrate. Jackson stayed home for a week doing schoolwork under Lena's supervision while Evan worked from home in the mornings. They found him a tutor, a retired math teacher who lived 2 blocks away and had infinite patience. Slowly, Jackson's comprehension improved, and more importantly, his willingness to ask for help improved. But the incident had shaken something loose in Lena. She'd been so focused on being liked, on fitting in smoothly, that she hadn't fully accepted the authority that came with being a parental figure. Jackson's crisis forced her to step into that role, whether she felt ready or not. "I grounded him," she told Sarah over lunch at the gallery, still processing her own actions. "I actually grounded a child. Who am I?" "You're a parent," Sarah said, amused. "That's literally your job now." "But what if I'm doing it wrong? What if I'm too strict or not strict enough or sending him to therapy for life?" "Lena, every parent worries about that. You're not special." Sarah softened her tone. "But for what it's worth, from what you've told me, you handled it exactly right. You were firm but fair. You focused on solving the actual problem, and you didn't let him manipulate you with tears. That's good parenting." The validation helped, but Lena still felt like she was constantly navigating without a map. Every situation required her to make judgment calls she didn't feel qualified to make. How much screen time was reasonable? What curfew was appropriate for a 12-year-old? When should she push the kids? And when should she give them space? She and Evan fell into a rhythm of checking in with each other constantly, making sure they were on the same page about discipline and expectations. It was exhausting but necessary, this constant communication, this refusal to let resentments fester or assumptions go unchecked. "We need to talk about Sophie's birthday," Evan said one night after the kids were asleep, pulling out his calendar. "She wants a party, but I don't know what 8-year-olds do for parties anymore." "We could do something at the house," Lena suggested. "Keep it small, maybe invite her class, do some kind of craft activity." "Anna always did elaborate themed parties," Evan said, then seemed to realize what he'd said. "Sorry, I didn't mean—" "It's okay," Lena interrupted, meaning it. "You're allowed to talk about her. She's part of this family's history, and pretending she wasn't would be worse than acknowledging she was." They planned Sophie's party together, a casual afternoon affair with pizza and a decorating-your-own cupcake station that kept 20 children occupied for hours. Sophie beamed the entire time, delighted to be the center of attention, and when she hugged Lena afterward and said it was the best birthday ever, Lena felt something in her chest expand. She was doing this. Actually doing it. Being a wife, a stepmother, a functioning member of a family unit. It wasn't perfect, God knows it wasn't perfect, but it was real and messy and hers. That night after the party cleanup was done and Sophie was asleep clutching the stuffed animal Lena had given her, Lena found herself back under the oak tree in the backyard. The spring evening was warm, the air full of the smell of cut grass and possibility. She thought about the woman who'd sat in that bus station 6 months ago, and she barely recognized her anymore. That woman had believed she was defined by her failures, by what her body couldn't do, by one man's cruel assessment of her worth. This woman, the one standing here now, knew better. She was defined by her choices, by the love she gave and received, by the family she showed up for every single day, even when she had no idea what she was doing. She heard footsteps behind her and turned to find Maya approaching, her phone in hand and her expression uncertain. "Can I ask you something?" Maya said. "Always. At school, people keep asking if you're my stepmom or just my dad's wife, and I don't know what to say. What am I supposed to call you?" Lena's throat tightened. "What do you want to call me?" "I don't know. Lena feels weird now that you're married to Dad, but Mom feels wrong because you're not my mom." Maya looked miserable. "I don't want to hurt your feelings, but I also don't want to forget my real mom." "You won't forget her," Lena said firmly. "And I would never ask you to. Maya, there's no rule book for this. You can call me whatever feels right to you, and it can change over time. Some days I might be Lena, some days I might be something else. What matters is that you know I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere, regardless of what you call me." "What if I mess up? What if I accidentally call you Mom because I'm not thinking?" "Then we'll both know it's because you were comfortable enough to let your guard down. And that's a good thing, not a bad thing." Lena pulled Maya into a hug, this almost teenager who was trying so hard to navigate impossible emotions. "I love you, kiddo. However you want to define our relationship, That part doesn't change. Maya hugged her back fiercely, and Lena felt the girl's tears soaking through her shirt. They stood there for a long time, under Anna's tree, two people learning how to be family in the shadow of loss. When they finally pulled apart, Maya wiped her eyes and managed a watery smile. "Thank you for not making this weird." "Oh, it's definitely weird," Lena said. "But we're going to figure it out anyway." As Maya headed back inside, Lena remained in the yard, looking up at the stars just becoming visible in the darkening sky. She thought about all the versions of family that existed in the world, all the ways people found each other and built something meaningful from the pieces they had available. This was hers. Imperfect, complicated, absolutely worth fighting for. And for the first time since Marcus threw those divorce papers at her feet, Lena felt genuinely grateful for her life. Not despite the hardship, but because of it. Because the breaking had made space for something new to grow. Something better, something real. Something that was finally, completely hers. Summer arrived with the kind of heat that made everything feel slower, heavier, more intense. The kids were out of school, which meant the house was constantly full of noise and activity, and the particular chaos that came with three children who had too much energy and not enough structure. Lena had naively assumed that summer would be easier without the morning rush and homework battles, but she'd quickly discovered that keeping three kids entertained and from killing each other required skills she hadn't known she needed to develop. "I'm bored," Sophie announced for the 14th time that morning, sprawled across the living room couch like a tragic heroine in a period drama. "Then find something to do," Lena said, trying to balance her laptop on her knees while responding to emails from the gallery. Sarah had been understanding about Lena working from home more often during the summer, but there were still acquisitions to manage and clients to contact. "There's nothing to do. Jackson won't let me play his video game, and Maya's locked in her room doing weird art stuff. So go outside, read a book, draw something, use your imagination." Sophie made a sound of pure disgust. "You sound like a mom." The observation hung in the air between them, and Lena wasn't sure whether it was meant as an insult or something else entirely. Before she could figure out how to respond, her phone rang with a number she didn't recognize. "Hello? Is this Lena Carter?" The voice was female, professional, unfamiliar. "Yes, this is she?" "This is Principal Morrison from Westfield Middle School. I'm calling because we have Maya Carter here in my office, and we need you or Mr. Carter to come pick her up immediately." Lena's stomach dropped. Maya was supposed to be at summer art camp, a program she'd been excited about for weeks. "What happened? Is she hurt?" "She's not injured, but there's been an incident that we need to discuss in person. Can you come now?" 20 minutes later, Lena was sitting in the principal's office with Maya beside her, the girl's face a mask of defiance that didn't quite hide the fear underneath. Principal Morrison, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, slid a piece of paper across the desk. It was a drawing, technically impressive, of a woman who looked remarkably like one of Maya's art teachers. Except the woman in the drawing was depicted in a way that was clearly mocking, with exaggerated features and a speech bubble containing words that were definitely inappropriate for a 12-year-old to be writing about an adult. Maya created this during free drawing time and showed it to several other students, Principal Morrison explained. When Ms. Fletcher saw it, she was understandably upset. "Maya, do you want to explain why you drew this?" Maya's jaw was set in a stubborn line. "She's been criticizing my work all week. Nothing I do is good enough. She told me yesterday that my perspective was juvenile and that I needed to grow up as an artist, so I drew what I thought of her." "That doesn't make it okay," Lena said, her mind racing through how to handle this. "Ms. Fletcher might have hurt your feelings, but responding with mockery and disrespect isn't the answer." "Why not? She disrespects me every day." "Because you're 12 and she's the adult, and adults are held to different standards even when they're wrong." Lena turned to the principal. "What are the consequences here?" "Maya is suspended from the art camp for the remainder of the week. She'll need to write a formal apology to Ms. Fletcher, and we'll have a conversation about appropriate ways to handle conflict." Principal Morrison's expression softened slightly. "For what it's worth, I spoke with Ms. Fletcher about her teaching methods. She tends to be overly critical with students she thinks have potential, but that's not an excuse. We'll be addressing it." The car ride home was tense and silent. Maya stared out the window with her arms crossed, radiating hurt and anger. Lena gripped the steering wheel and tried to figure out what Anna would have done in this situation, then forced herself to stop thinking that way. Anna wasn't here. Lena was. And she had to trust her own judgment, even when she wasn't sure it was right. "You're disappointed in me," Maya finally said, her voice small. "I'm frustrated," Lena corrected. "Not at you as a person, but at the choice you made. Maya, you're incredibly talented. That drawing proved it. You captured Ms. Fletcher perfectly, which means you have serious observational skills. But you used those skills to hurt someone instead of to create something meaningful. She hurt me first. I know she did. And that wasn't fair or right. But meeting cruelty with cruelty just means there's more cruelty in the world. You're better than that." Lena glanced over at Maya, whose defiance was starting to crack around the edges. "What were you really trying to say with that drawing?" "That I'm tired of people telling me I'm not good enough," Maya burst out. And suddenly she was crying, hard sobs that shook her whole body. "First mom dies, and then everyone treats me like I'm broken, and then I finally find something I'm good at, and this stupid teacher tells me I'm juvenile. When do I get to just be good at something without someone ruining it?" Lena pulled over into a parking lot, put the car in park, and unbuckled her seatbelt so she could turn to face Maya fully. "Come here," she said. And Maya collapsed into her arms, crying into her shoulder with the kind of abandon that only happened when someone had been holding everything in for too long. "You are good enough," Lena said fiercely, holding Maya tight. "You're extraordinary. One teacher's poor choice of words doesn't change that. But baby, you can't let other people's opinions, good or bad, define your worth. Your art is valuable because it means something to you, because it's how you process the world, not because adults approve of it." "How do you do that?" Maya asked, her voice muffled. "How do you not care what people think?" "I'm still learning," Lena admitted. "For a long time, I thought my value came from other people's assessment of me. When my ex-husband said I was worthless, I believed him. It took losing everything to realize that he was wrong, that I got to decide my own worth, not him." They sat there for a long time, Lena holding Maya while the girl cried out weeks or maybe months of accumulated grief and frustration. When the tears finally subsided, Maya pulled back and wiped her face with her sleeve. "I still have to apologize to Ms. Fletcher, don't I?" "You do. But you don't have to mean it in the way they want you to. You can apologize for the method while still standing by the feeling that prompted it. There's a difference between saying, 'I'm sorry for drawing something hurtful,' and saying, 'I'm sorry for feeling hurt.'" Maya nodded slowly, processing this distinction. "Will you help me write it?" "Of course I will." When they got home, Evan's car was already in the driveway, which meant Principal Morrison had called him too. Lena braced herself for his reaction, unsure whether he'd be angry at Maya, at the teacher, or at Lena for not handling it better. But when they walked inside, Evan just looked tired. He was sitting at the kitchen table with Jackson and Sophie, who both looked concerned. Jackson in particular seemed almost protective, which was new. "Maya, go upstairs for a bit," Evan said quietly. "I need to talk to Lena." Once Maya was gone, Evan turned to Lena with an expression she couldn't quite read. "The principal called me, said you handled it well." "I don't know about that. I'm still not sure what I'm doing." "That makes two of us." Evan ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Lena had learned meant he was stressed. Anna always knew exactly what to do with Maya. They had this connection I could never quite figure out. I feel like I'm constantly failing her. "You're not failing her," Lena said firmly. "She's a 12-year-old dealing with grief and adolescence and a teacher who doesn't know how to give constructive criticism. None of this is your fault." "But I should have known she was struggling. I should have seen the signs." "Evan, you can't read minds. None of us can. All we can do is respond when problems surface and try to give the kids tools to handle things better next time." Lena sat down beside him, taking his hand. "Maya and I had a good talk in the car. I think we got to the real issue, which wasn't about the drawing at all." She filled him in on their conversation, watching his expression shift from worry to understanding to something that looked like relief. When she finished, he squeezed her hand. "Thank you," he said simply, "for being there, for knowing what to say, for being better at this than I am." "I'm not better at it. I'm just different at it. We're a team, remember?" We cover each other's blind spots. Jackson, who'd been listening silently, finally spoke up. Is Maya going to be okay? She's going to be fine, Lena assured him. She made a mistake, and she's dealing with the consequences, but she's learning from it. That's all any of us can do. The rest of the week was dedicated to damage control. Maya wrote her apology letter, which Lena helped her revise 3 times until it struck the right balance of acknowledging wrongdoing without completely capitulating. They delivered it to Ms. Turisaichi Keys Fletcher together, and Lena made a point of speaking to the teacher privately about the importance of constructive criticism, especially with students who were already fragile. Ms. Fletcher, to her credit, seemed genuinely chastened. I didn't realize how harsh I'd been. I push the talented ones harder because I want them to reach their potential, but I can see how that backfired. Maybe try leading with what they're doing right before you point out what needs work, Lena suggested, especially with kids who've experienced loss. They need to feel seen for their strengths before they can hear about their weaknesses. With Maya banned from art camp, Lena ended up taking the week off from the gallery to be home with the kids full-time. It was exhausting and occasionally maddening, but it also gave her insight into the daily dynamics she usually only saw in fragments. She watched Jackson try to be the responsible older brother while secretly wanting to be just a kid. She saw Sophie navigate between wanting attention and wanting independence in the way only 8-year-olds could, and she witnessed Maya slowly coming out of her shell again, testing whether Lena would still be there after she'd messed up. You didn't leave, Maya said one evening as they cooked dinner together, the observation coming out of nowhere. Why would I leave? I thought maybe after I got in trouble you'd decide we were too much work. That's what Dad's last girlfriend did. We met her twice, and then Jackson had a meltdown at a restaurant, and we never saw her again. Lena set down the knife she'd been using to chop vegetables and turned to face Maya directly. I'm not going anywhere. Not because of a drawing, not because of a meltdown, not because this is hard sometimes. I chose this family, and that means I chose all of it. The good days and the difficult days, and the days where we're all just trying to survive. Promise? I promise. But that night, after the kids were asleep, Lena found herself back at her laptop, composing an email to the director of Maya's art camp. She explained the situation, advocated for Maya's readmission, and offered to volunteer at the camp for the remaining weeks if they needed additional supervision. It was presumptuous, maybe even overstepping, but she did it anyway because this was what mothers did. They fought for their kids, biological or not. The director responded the next morning, agreeing to let Maya return with the condition that Lena would be there as a volunteer assistant. So for the next 3 weeks, Lena spent her mornings at an art camp, helping wrangle 12-year-olds through painting projects and sculpture experiments, while Maya slowly rebuilt her confidence under the guidance of a different, kinder teacher. You didn't have to do this, Evan said one evening, watching Lena scrub paint out of her clothes after a particularly messy day involving acrylics and unsupervised creativity. Yes, I did. Maya needed to go back and prove to herself that one bad experience didn't define her. She couldn't do that if I wasn't willing to be there with her. Most people wouldn't go to these lengths for someone else's kid. She's not someone else's kid, Lena said, and was surprised by the fierceness in her own voice. She's mine too. Maybe not biologically, but in every way that matters. The admission hung between them, this acknowledgement of how completely Lena had woven herself into this family's fabric. Evan pulled her close, and she could feel the emotion in the way he held her, like she was something precious he was afraid of breaking. I love you, he said against her hair. I don't think I tell you that enough. You show me every day. That's better than words. But later that night, lying in bed, Lena allowed herself to acknowledge the fear that lived underneath her determination. What if she wasn't enough? What if the kids eventually resented her for trying to fill a role that could never truly be filled? What if Evan woke up one day and realized he'd settled for someone when he deserved everything? The thought spiraled until she felt Evan's hand on her back, gentle and grounding. You're thinking too loud again, he murmured. Sorry, I'll be quiet. Or you could tell me what's worrying you. So she did. Told him about the fears that kept her awake, the constant second-guessing, the belief that eventually everyone would see through her and realize she was still just the broken woman from the bus station, playing dress-up in a life she hadn't earned. Evan listened without interrupting, and when she finally ran out of words, he shifted so they were face to face in the darkness. "You want to know what I see when I look at you?" he asked. "I see someone who takes a week off work to volunteer at an art camp because her stepdaughter needed support. I see someone who sits with Jackson for hours helping him with math even though she's exhausted. I see someone who braids Sophie's hair every morning, even though Sophie is perfectly capable of doing it herself because Sophie needs that physical connection. I see someone who shows up every single day and gives everything she has to this family and then worries that it's not enough. But what if? No." His voice was gentle but firm. "No more what ifs. You are enough, Lena, not because you're perfect or because you never doubt yourself, but because you keep showing up despite the doubts. That's what matters." The words should have been comforting, but Lena still felt the knot of anxiety in her chest. It would take more than one conversation to undo years of Marcus's conditioning, more than Evan's reassurance to truly believe she deserved this life. But it was a start. August brought a different kind of crisis when Evan's company faced a hostile takeover attempt from a competitor. Suddenly he was working 18-hour days, barely home except to sleep, the stress evident in every line of his body. Lena found herself managing the household almost entirely alone, making decisions about everything from dinner menus to whether Sophie needed to see a doctor for a cough that wouldn't go away. "I'm sorry," Evan said one rare evening when he made it home for dinner, looking haggard and defeated. "I know I'm dumping everything on you. This is exactly what I did to Anna, and I swore I wouldn't do it again." "The difference is I knew what I was signing up for," Lena pointed out. "You told me your company was important to you. I'm not going to resent you for working hard, as long as you don't resent me for telling you when you need to slow down." "Do I need to slow down?" Lena thought about Jackson asking yesterday if Dad still lived here, about Sophie crying because Evan had missed her school presentation, about Maya's careful withdrawal into herself whenever Evan was too distracted to notice her. "Yes," she said honestly. "The kids need you. I need you. The company will survive if you take a weekend off. Your family might not." She expected him to argue, to defend his choices, to remind her that he was providing for all of them through his work. But instead, Evan just nodded, set down his phone, and called his brother. "Mike, I need you to cover for me this weekend. I don't care what's happening. Handle it. I need to be with my family." The weekend Evan took off was simple but transformative. They went to the beach, built sandcastles with Sophie, taught Jackson to body surf, and sat with Maya while she sketched the ocean and talked about applying to art school in 6 years. They ate ice cream for dinner and stayed up too late watching stars, and Lena watched Evan slowly remember how to be just a father and husband instead of a CEO. "I forget sometimes," he admitted on Sunday evening as they drove home with 3 exhausted children sleeping in the back seat. "I forget that they're growing up fast, and I'm missing it." "Then don't miss it anymore," Lena said simply. "Delegate more at work, hire another VP, do whatever it takes to be present for these years, because they're not going to be kids forever." "Is that what you would have told Anna?" The question surprised her. "I don't know what I would have told Anna, but I'm telling you, as your wife, that your children need their father more than your company needs its CEO." Evan reached over and took her hand, squeezing it in silent acknowledgement. When they got home, he disappeared into his office and emerged an hour later looking lighter. "I promoted Jenkins to VP of Operations," he announced. "He's going to handle day-to-day decisions so I can focus on strategy and actually have a life. It should free up at least 20 hours a week." Lena kissed him, tasting salt from the ocean and the promise of change. "Thank you for listening. Thank you for being brave enough to tell me the truth." The shift in Evan's schedule changed the family's dynamic in subtle but important ways. He was there for breakfast most mornings now, helping Sophie with her homework, attending Jackson's soccer practices, taking Maya to art supply stores on Saturday afternoons. And as he became more present, Lena felt some of the weight she'd been carrying distribute more evenly across both their shoulders. They were becoming a real partnership, not just 2 broken people clinging to each other, but a functional team raising children together. It wasn't always smooth. They still argued about discipline strategies and household logistics, and whose turn it was to handle Sophie's dramatic bedtime routine. But they were figuring it out together, which somehow made even the difficult moments feel manageable. One evening in late August, as summer was beginning its slow fade into fall, Lena found a letter on the kitchen counter addressed to her. The return address was from a law office in the city, and her stomach dropped, immediately assuming the worst. Marcus coming after her for something, or legal trouble from the divorce she thought was settled. But when she opened it, the contents were completely unexpected. It was from Marcus's mother, Elizabeth Whitmore, a woman Lena had barely known during her marriage because Marcus had kept his family and his wife in separate compartments of his life. The letter was formal but kind, explaining that Elizabeth had recently learned the full circumstances of Lena's divorce from Marcus, who'd apparently told his family a very different story than what had actually happened. Elizabeth wrote that she was appalled by her son's behavior, that she'd always liked Lena and had been sorry to see the marriage end, and that she wanted to make things right in whatever small way she could. Enclosed with the letter was a check for $50,000, along with a note explaining that it was Lena's portion of a family trust that Marcus had illegally withheld during the divorce proceedings. Elizabeth had discovered this while reviewing estate documents with her attorney and had immediately moved to correct it. Lena stared at the check for a long time, unable to process what she was seeing. $50,000. Enough to pay off what little debt she had remaining. Enough to finally feel financially secure instead of constantly calculating whether she could afford basic necessities. Enough to prove that she hadn't been crazy, that Marcus really had been as cruel and vindictive as she remembered. "What's wrong?" Evan asked, coming into the kitchen and immediately sensing her distress. Lena handed him the letter and the check without speaking. He read it slowly, his expression cycling through confusion, anger, and finally something that looked like relief. "This is good news," he said carefully. "Right?" "I don't know what it is," Lena admitted. "Part of me wants to tear up the check and throw it away because I don't want anything from that family. But another part of me knows that money represents justice, in a weird way. It's proof that I wasn't worthless, that Marcus was the one who did wrong. Then keep it. Not because you need it financially, but because you deserve it. You deserve to have something from that part of your life that isn't just pain and trauma." Lena looked down at the check again, at this unexpected gift from a woman she barely knew. And slowly, she understood what Elizabeth Whitmore had really been offering. Not just money, but validation. An acknowledgement from someone in Marcus's family that Lena had been wronged, that she hadn't deserved what happened to her. "I think I'll donate some of it," Lena said, the idea forming as she spoke. "To St. Catherine's Shelter, where I stayed that first night. They saved my life in a very real way. It seems right to give back. And the rest? College funds for the kids, and maybe a rainy day account, just in case. Security, but not dependence." Evan pulled her into his arms, and Lena let herself be held, feeling the weight of the past year settle into something she could finally carry without stumbling. She'd been thrown away and rebuilt herself. Found love and family in the rubble. Learned that her worth wasn't determined by her biology or her past or anyone's opinion of her. She was enough, just as she was. Finally, completely, undeniably enough. And as she stood there in Evan's embrace, in the kitchen of the home they were building together, with 3 children upstairs who called her theirs in their own complicated ways, Lena felt something shift inside her. Not healing, exactly. Healing implied something broken, returning to its original state. This was different. This was transformation, the creation of something entirely new from the shattered pieces of who she'd been. "I love you," she told Evan, meaning it in ways she hadn't been capable of meaning it 6 months ago. "I love you too," he said. "Thank you for not giving up. On yourself, on me, on this whole messy, beautiful thing we're building. Thank you for giving me a reason not to." That night, Lena lay awake long after Evan had fallen asleep beside her, thinking about the journey that had brought her here. From that bus station to this bedroom, from worthless to wanted, from broken to becoming whole. It hadn't been easy, and she knew there would be more challenges ahead. But for the first time since Marcus had thrown those divorce papers at her feet, Lena felt genuinely hopeful about the future. Not because everything was perfect, but because she'd learned she could survive imperfection. Could build something meaningful from fragments and faith, and the willingness to keep showing up even when it scared her. She was enough. She had always been enough. And tomorrow, she would wake up and prove it all over again. Fall arrived with its usual theatrics, the trees along their street transforming into flames of orange and gold seemingly overnight. Lena stood at the kitchen window watching leaves spiral down while she waited for the coffee to brew, already mentally organizing the day ahead. Jackson had a soccer game at 10. Maya needed supplies for a school project, and Sophie had declared last night that she wanted to learn how to bake cookies, which meant the afternoon would probably involve a flour-covered kitchen and at least one minor disaster. These were the thoughts that occupied her mind now instead of whether she had enough money for bus fare or where she'd sleep that night. The shift still caught her off guard sometimes, this radical transformation from survival mode to actually living. A year ago, she'd been sleeping in a shelter, convinced her life was over. Now she was planning weekend logistics and worrying about whether they had enough milk. "You're thinking too loud again," Evan said, appearing behind her and sliding his arms around her waist. "I can hear your brain from upstairs. I'm just organizing the day. Jackson's game, Maya's project, Sophie's baking ambitions that will definitely end in chaos." "Sounds perfect," Evan said, kissing her temple. "Perfectly normal, perfectly chaotic, perfectly us." The doorbell interrupted them, which was unusual for a Saturday morning. Lena opened the door to find a young woman, maybe late 20s, holding a manila folder and looking nervous in a way that immediately put Lena on edge. "Can I help you?" "I'm looking for Evan Carter. Is he home?" Evan appeared in the hallway, his expression shifting from curious to wary when he saw the woman. "I'm Evan Carter. My name is Rachel Morrison. I'm Anna's cousin." The woman's voice shook slightly. "I know this is unexpected, but I need to talk to you. It's about Anna and it's important." The kitchen table had become the setting for difficult conversations, Lena had learned. It was where they'd discussed Jackson's suspension, where Maya had cried about her art teacher, where they'd made every major family decision. Now it hosted Rachel Morrison, who sat with her folder clutched in both hands while Evan and Lena sat across from her waiting. "I should have come sooner," Rachel began. "But I didn't know how, and part of me thought maybe it was better to leave things alone. But then I saw your wedding announcement online, and I realized I couldn't keep this to myself anymore." "Keep what to yourself?" Evan's voice was careful, controlled in the way it got when he was bracing for bad news. Rachel opened the folder and pulled out a stack of letters, all in the same handwriting, all addressed to Evan but marked "Return to Sender." "Anna wrote these in the months before she died. She gave them to me and made me promise not to send them while she was alive. She said if something happened to her, I should wait a year and then give them to you. But I couldn't do it. I was so angry at her for what she was planning, and I convinced myself you were better off not knowing." Lena felt ice forming in her stomach. What was she planning? Rachel looked at Evan with something like pity. "The car accident wasn't an accident. Anna drove into that tree on purpose. She'd been planning it for months." The silence that followed was so complete that Lena could hear the clock ticking in the living room, the refrigerator humming, the sound of children playing upstairs, completely unaware that their understanding of their mother's death was about to shatter. "That's not possible," Evan said, but his voice lacked conviction. "The police investigated. They said she lost control on a wet road." "Because that's what it looked like." Anna was smart. She planned it carefully, made sure it would look like an accident so you and the kids wouldn't have to carry the weight of suicide. Rachel pushed the letters across the table. "She explains everything in these. The depression that got worse after Sophie was born, the medication that stopped working, the feeling that she was failing all of you by being too broken to function. She thought you'd all be better off without her." Evan picked up the first letter with shaking hands. Lena watched his face as he read, saw the moment denial crumbled into horrified understanding. She reached for his hand, but he pulled away, standing up abruptly and walking to the window with his back to both of them. "Why now?" His voice was rough with barely contained emotion. "Why wait 2 years to tell me this?" "Because I was a coward," Rachel admitted. "And because I was angry at Anna for giving up, for leaving you to explain to her children why their mother was gone. But seeing your wedding announcement, seeing that you'd found someone else, I realized that maybe Anna had been right about one thing, that you deserved to move on, but you also deserve to know the truth." "Does anyone else know?" Lena asked, finding her voice finally. "Just me. Anna made me swear not to tell her parents or anyone else in the family. She said the truth would destroy them, and she didn't want her depression to become everyone's burden after she was gone." Evan turned back from the window, his face a mask of pain that made Lena's chest ache. I should have seen it. Should have known something was wrong. I was so focused on work, on building the company, on providing for everyone. I thought I was being a good husband and father, but I missed everything that mattered. You can't think like that, Rachel said quickly. Anna's letters make it clear that none of this was your fault. She was sick, and she hid it from everyone because she was ashamed. You couldn't have saved her if she didn't want to be saved. But Lena could see that Evan wasn't hearing this. He was already disappearing into guilt, into the what-ifs and should-haves that would eat him alive if she let them. She stood and moved to him, taking his face in her hands and forcing him to look at her. "Listen to me," she said firmly. "You are not responsible for Anna's choices. You're not responsible for her depression or her decision or any of it. What you are responsible for is what you do next, and right now your children need you to hold it together." "How am I supposed to tell them?" Evan's voice broke. "How do I explain that their mother chose to leave them?" "Maybe you don't," Lena said, the answer coming to her even as she spoke. "Maybe some truths are too heavy for children to carry. They're already dealing with enough grief without adding abandonment to it." Rachel cleared her throat. Anna thought about that too. "There's a letter here for each of the kids, to be given to them when they're older. 18, she specifies. She wanted them to understand eventually, but not while they were still children." Evan sank back into his chair, looking suddenly older and more fragile than Lena had ever seen him. "Can I read them? The other letters?" "They're yours now. All of them." Rachel stood, gathering her things. "I'm sorry I waited so long. I'm sorry for all of it." After Rachel left, Lena and Evan sat in the kitchen for a long time, not speaking, the letters spread across the table between them like evidence at a trial. Upstairs, they could hear the kids laughing, arguing about whose turn it was to choose a movie, blissfully unaware that their world had just shifted on its axis. "Read them," Lena finally said. "Whatever she wrote, you need to know. I'll be right here." So Evan read while Lena sat beside him, watching emotions play across his face. Grief, anger, guilt, understanding, and finally, a kind of exhausted acceptance. Anna's words, preserved in her careful handwriting, painted a picture of a woman who'd loved her family desperately, but had been drowning in a darkness she couldn't escape. She'd tried medication, therapy, everything, but nothing had worked. And rather than continue to fail them while alive, she'd chosen to become a memory they could cherish instead of a burden they had to carry. "She talks about you in this one," Evan said eventually, holding up one of the later letters. "Written about a month before she died. She says she hopes I find someone eventually, someone who can be present in ways she couldn't anymore, someone who can help me raise the kids without the weight of depression making everything harder. Evan, she would have liked you," he continued, his voice thick. "Not as a replacement, but as someone who could give the kids what she couldn't: stability, presence, the ability to show up consistently." Lena felt tears sliding down her face, grieving for a woman she'd never met, but who'd shaped the family she now loved. "I'm so sorry," she felt she had no other choice. "Me too." They sat together in the quiet, processing this new reality, until Sophie's voice called down the stairs asking when they were making cookies. Evan looked at Lena with red-rimmed eyes, and she saw the question there. "How do we go back to normal after this?" "We put the letters away," Lena said softly. "We process this privately, maybe with a therapist, and we keep living, because that's what Anna wanted, for you and the kids to keep living." So they did. Evan tucked the letters into his office safe, and they went upstairs to find 3 children who needed them. They made cookies with Sophie, creating exactly the flower-covered chaos Lena had predicted. They helped Maya organize her project supplies. They cheered at Jackson's soccer game, where he scored his first goal and looked to the stands to make sure they'd seen it. And through it all, Lena watched Evan carry this new weight, this knowledge that the past 3 years of grief had been built on an incomplete truth. That night, after the kids were in bed, he finally broke down completely, sobbing in a way that shook his whole body, while Lena held him. "I keep thinking about all the signs I missed," he said when he could speak again. "The days she couldn't get out of bed, the way she'd stare into space, how she kept saying she was tired all the time. I thought it was just stress from having 3 kids. I didn't know she was planning to die." "You couldn't have known if she was hiding it. Depression is insidious that way. It makes people ashamed, makes them hide their suffering because they think it's a personal failure rather than an illness. But I was her husband. I should have— Stop, Lena interrupted, her voice gentle but firm. You're going to torture yourself with should-haves, and it won't change anything. What's done is done. What matters now is how we move forward. How do you do that? Evan asked. How do you move forward from something like this? The same way we've moved forward from everything else. One day at a time. With honesty and grace, and the understanding that healing isn't linear. Lena cupped his face in her hands. We'll get through this. Together. The next few weeks were harder than any they'd faced yet. Evan started seeing a therapist who specialized in complicated grief, working through his feelings about Anna's suicide and his guilt about moving on. Lena supported him the best she could while also maintaining normalcy for the kids, who sensed something was off but couldn't quite identify what. Is Dad okay? Maya asked one evening while they were washing dishes together. He seemed sad again, like he was before you came. Lena chose her words carefully. He's processing some difficult feelings about your mom. Sometimes grief comes back, even years later when we learn new things or see old situations from a different perspective. But he's not going to leave us, right? Like, mentally check out the way he did after Mom died? No, baby. He's getting help this time, and he has me to make sure he doesn't disappear into himself. We're going to be okay. Maya nodded, but Lena could see the fear in her eyes. This child who'd already lost one parent was terrified of losing the other, even emotionally. That night, Lena talked to Evan about it, and the next day he made a point of taking Maya out for lunch. Just the two of them, reassuring her that he was okay and wasn't going anywhere. It was in these small moments of crisis that Lena felt the family truly solidifying. They were learning to communicate, to address problems before they festered, to be honest about their struggles instead of pretending everything was fine. It wasn't always pretty, but it was real, and real was what they needed. October brought Maya's 13th birthday, a milestone that felt significant in ways Lena couldn't quite articulate. They threw a small party with a few of Maya's friends, and Lena watched this almost teenager blow out candles and make a wish, and she wondered what Anna would think of the young woman her daughter was becoming. Later, after the guests had left and the kids were in bed, Maya came downstairs to find Lena cleaning up the kitchen. Can I talk to you about something? Always, Lena said, setting down the dish she'd been washing. I've been thinking about what to call you, like officially. Maya twisted her hands together nervously. I know we talked about this before, but it feels different now. You've been here for almost a year and you're married to Dad, and you're not just his wife. You're my— I don't know what you are, actually. What do you want me to be? I think I want to call you Mom, Maya said in a rush. Not because you're replacing my real mom, but because that's what you do. You do mom things. You show up and help with homework and volunteer at stupid art camps and make sure I eat vegetables. That's what moms do, right? Lena felt her eyes filling with tears. Maya, I would be honored if you called me Mom, but only if you're sure. I never want you to feel like you're betraying your mother's memory. I think my mom would be okay with it, Maya said quietly. I think she'd be glad I have someone who cares about me the way you do. They hugged, this woman and this girl who'd found each other in the wreckage of loss and built something new. And when Evan came downstairs to find them both crying in the kitchen, Maya announced simply, I'm going to call Lena Mom now, if that's okay with everyone. Jackson and Sophie, who'd apparently been eavesdropping from the stairs, immediately ran down. Sophie launched herself at Lena, shouting, Mom! Mom! With the enthusiasm of an 8-year-old who'd been waiting for permission. Jackson was more reserved, but that night at dinner when he casually asked, Mom, can you pass the salt? Lena's heart nearly burst. Is this weird for you? Evan asked later, watching Lena get ready for bed with an expression of wonder. Going from having no family to suddenly having 3 kids calling you Mom? It's the best kind of weird, Lena admitted. A year ago, Marcus told me I was worthless because I couldn't have children. Now I have 3, and they chose me. I didn't give birth to them, but they're mine in every way that matters. They are, Evan agreed, pulling her close. And you're exactly the mother they needed. November brought an unexpected visitor when Marcus's lawyer called requesting a meeting. Lena's first instinct was to refuse, to let sleeping dogs lie, but Evan convinced her to at least hear what they had to say. The meeting was held at a neutral location, a coffee shop downtown where Lena arrived with Evan beside her for support. Marcus's lawyer, a sharp woman named Patricia Cheng, got straight to the point. Marcus wants to apologize, she said. Properly. He's been in therapy since the divorce, dealing with some issues around control and toxic masculinity, and he's realized how badly he treated you. He's not asking for forgiveness, but he wanted you to know that he's working on being better. Why are you telling me this? Lena asked. Because he knows a direct approach would be inappropriate, but he wanted you to hear it from someone. He also wanted you to know that his mother's payment was correct. He did withhold money that was rightfully yours, and he's sorry for that too. Lena sat with this for a moment, trying to decide how she felt. The truth was, she didn't feel much of anything. Marcus was a chapter in her life that had closed, and while she appreciated that he was apparently getting help, it didn't change what he'd done or how he'd made her feel. Tell him thank you for the apology, Lena finally said, and tell him I hope therapy helps him become a better person. But also tell him that I've moved on, and I'd prefer we have no further contact. Patricia nodded, seeming to expect this response. Fair enough. For what it's worth, I think you dodged a bullet. The man I met a year ago was not someone I'd want to be married to. After she left, Evan squeezed Lena's hand. How do you feel? Grateful, Lena said honestly. Grateful that I got out before I wasted any more years. Grateful that his cruelty pushed me towards something better. Grateful that I'm not that woman anymore. You never were that woman, Evan said firmly. You were always strong and capable and worthy. You just needed to remember it. December arrived with the first real snow of the season, and with it came the question of how to handle the holidays. The kids wanted to know if they were going to do things the way Anna used to, and Lena found herself navigating the delicate balance between honoring traditions and creating new ones. Your mom had her way of doing things, Lena told them at a family meeting, and those traditions were special and meaningful. But I think we can honor her while also creating some new traditions that are ours. What if we keep some of her favorites and add some new ones? So they decorated the tree with Anna's ornaments while playing music that Lena loved. They made Anna's famous hot chocolate recipe but tried Lena's grandmother's cookie recipe. They went to see the Christmas lights that Anna had taken them to every year, but they also went ice skating, which was something new for all of them. On Christmas Eve, Lena found herself standing in the kitchen making dinner while Evan supervised the kids' attempts to build gingerbread houses in the living room. The chaos was tremendous, frosting everywhere, debates about structural integrity, Sophie crying because her roof kept falling off. But it was beautiful in its imperfection. Sarah stopped by with gifts, and Mike called from wherever he was traveling for work, and the house filled with noise and laughter and the particular magic that came from people who'd chosen to be a family. As Lena watched it all unfold, she felt a sense of peace settle over her that she'd never experienced before. This was home. Not the house itself, but the people in it, the noise and the chaos, and the imperfect love that held it all together. That night, after the kids were finally in bed and the gingerbread houses were safely preserved on the kitchen counter, Evan pulled out a small wrapped box. I have something for you, he said, suddenly nervous in a way that was endearing. It's not much, but it felt important. Lena unwrapped the box to find a delicate necklace with a charm in the shape of a tree. But not just any tree. It had 3 birds perched in its branches, each one slightly different. The tree is you, Evan explained, strong and rooted. The birds are the kids, all different, but all safe in your branches. You've given them a place to land, Lena. You've given all of us a place to land. Lena looked at the necklace, at this tangible representation of what she'd become, and felt tears streaming down her face. Thank you, she whispered, for seeing me, for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself. Thank you for not giving up that night at the bus station, Evan said, fastening the necklace around her neck. Thank you for being brave enough to accept help, to take a chance on us, to build this beautiful, messy life together. They stood together in the quiet house, holding each other while snow fell outside and their children slept upstairs, safe and loved and part of something bigger than themselves. The next morning was Christmas, and Lena woke early to start the breakfast casserole that had become her contribution to their holiday traditions. As she moved around the kitchen in the pre-dawn quiet, she thought about that woman in the bus station, frozen and broken and convinced she was worthless. That woman would never believe she could end up here, in this house, with this family, wearing this necklace that represented roots she'd grown and a family she'd helped build. She would never believe she could be called mom by 3 children who weren't biologically hers, but who loved her anyway. She would never believe she could wake up on Christmas morning feeling grateful instead of empty. But belief wasn't required. The evidence was all around her. Sophie came downstairs first, as always, bouncing with excitement about presents. Then Jackson, trying to be cool but unable to hide his anticipation. Finally Maya, still sleepy but smiling, her teenage aloofness abandoned in favor of childlike joy. "Merry Christmas, Mom," they chorused, and Lena felt the words settle into her bones like a benediction. "Merry Christmas, my loves," she said back, and meant it with every fiber of her being. As they gathered around the tree and the morning unfolded in wrapping paper and laughter and the particular chaos of a family Christmas, Lena caught Evan's eye across the room. He smiled at her, that smile that said everything words couldn't, and she smiled back. They'd both been broken when they found each other, both convinced they'd lost their chance at happiness, both struggling to figure out how to keep living after loss had reshaped their worlds. But here they were, not just surviving, but thriving, building something beautiful from their damaged pieces, creating a family that worked not because it was perfect, but because it was honest and loving and willing to keep trying even when things got hard. Lena thought about Anna sometimes, about the woman who'd loved these children first, who'd struggled with demons she couldn't conquer and made an impossible choice. She thought about Marcus and the cruelty that had set her on this path. She thought about all the moments of luck and grace that had conspired to bring her here. Doris offering her cardigan in the bus station, Patricia Vance's daughter needing help at the gallery, Evan noticing her that first night when he could have just driven past. But mostly, she thought about choice. Because while luck and grace had played their parts, it was choice that had really saved her. The choice to accept help. The choice to try again. The choice to believe she might be worth something after all. And most importantly, the choice to show up every day for this family, even when it was hard, even when she doubted herself, even when it would have been easier to run. "Mom, you're not paying attention," Sophie complained, tugging at her sleeve. "I asked if we can make pancakes for breakfast." "We have the breakfast casserole I made," Lena said, ruffling Sophie's hair. "But I want pancakes." "Then I guess we're having both," Lena laughed, heading to the kitchen with Sophie trailing behind her, already chattering about what kind of pancakes they should make. This was her life now. Breakfast negotiations and present wrapping and 3 kids who needed her in 100 different ways. A husband who saw her completely and loved her anyway. A home that felt safe instead of suffocating. A future that stretched out before her full of possibility instead of ending in that frozen bus station. She was enough. She had always been enough. It had just taken losing everything to finally believe it, and as she stood at the stove making pancakes while Sophie helped, and Christmas music played in the background and she could hear Evan and the other kids laughing in the living room, Lena understood that this was the life she'd been meant to find all along. Not the one she'd planned, not the one she'd thought she wanted, but the one that fit perfectly around her particular shape of broken and brave. She touched the necklace at her throat, feeling the weight of the tree and its 3 birds, and she smiled. Home wasn't a place. It was these people, this noise, this beautiful, imperfect love that had saved her by letting her say